Clinical Research Podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
All right, guys. Hello. Welcome to another Note to File Live. Today is November 4th. Is that right, Denali?
Yeah, it's already November. So, yes, yeah. November 4th.
Sneaks up. And for anybody keeping track, today is Use Your Common Sense Day, apparently, according to the internet. So I think this is a perfect time for this very interview.
It's a much needed day. Shouldn't that be every day?
Well, not every day. Sometimes you got to have fun with them.
Baby steps, I guess.
All right. Well, let's welcome our guest. Let's cut right to it. Walt, thank you so much for coming on, sir.
Some time, and
there you go.
And your followers provided me with a lot of information. So thank you for that.
Hey, don't rat us. Don't rat everybody out. Okay. Okay. Come on. No, I'm really fascinated. I mean, first, if you would, we're used to interviewing people like very specifically in the clinical research space, but you've written a lot throughout the years, multiple, 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I guess tell us a little bit about your background and sort of like specifically, I mean, you write a lot about the medical fields, like sort of what drew you to that or what continues to draw you to that.
Thank you. Well, I have been interested in the medical field for a long time because of the silence that often surrounds those decisions. And, being in the media, transparency is a big deal. If you want to, invite a reporter's interest, just be untransparent or non-transparent, because that's catnip for investigative reporters.
Well, that's like the Streisand effect, sort of like the more you try to hide it, the more
that's true.
People
that's true.
Want to come to it.
And so I began, my interest really began with looking at the mortality rates of these open heart clinics. And this was like years and years and decades ago. And for the first time, I realized that there was data out there that could actually show good and bad, understanding that there are nuances to that data. But I grew up in an era where you just believed whatever the doctors told you. And that just didn't seem right for me. I mean, I did, and I trust them, and you want to trust the people that hold your life in their hands. But I just thought I needed to do a little digging in that area. And that led me to actually writing a book on the hospital industry 20, 30 years ago. And I just wrote another book, and I waited all those years because writing a book is not fun and it's a hard experience. But at any rate, so I continued my interest through various news organizations that I joined, Wall Street Journal, then 60 Minutes, and now the New York Times. So that's me in a nutshell. Very good.
Very good. And so, I mean, what drew your attention, I guess, specifically to IRBs, or maybe was it more, this is something we talk about a lot, is sort of the growing involvement of private equity across like the whole healthcare space. We occupy a very small niche, and even we see it sort of going rampant. And, you've touched on so many things that I feel like we've talked about or have like wondered about throughout the years. So this is what really resonated with me. So I guess what drew your attention, I guess, to that specifically?
Well, I was looking around for a project to investigate, and I like to go where others do not go, because the darker corners of our world. And I've known so many people that were afflicted by Alzheimer's. And I thought, well, let me just, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a researcher, but I know how to ask questions. And I thought, let me look at it. It's been around for 100 years. We haven't found a solution to it, a cure for it. People claim there were medicine out there that could help, but I wanted to look into it. So I started looking at sort of the whole Biogen controversy involving Aduhelm. And I was struck by the fact that almost the entire advisory committee, FDA advisory committee, had voted that this drug should not be approved. And yet it was. And to me, that it sort of indicated what we in the investigative world might call regulatory capture. And it just seemed that this required some close analysis. And in the course of looking at that, naturally I looked at the protocol. Anyhow, but I looked at, this was after the Biogen thing. I knew that that there was all this research was going on, and I got a hold of a protocol from ASI and their drug that they were coming up with, which was later called Leqembi. And I've read some protocols. I really didn't know what I was looking for. I knew that everybody had read this. I mean, it'd gone through a lot of iterations and oversight, but there's something about it. There's a sign that they put on the Long Island Railroad that says, "If you see something, say something." And so I saw something and I said something. Because what I saw struck me as somehow incongruous with the role that I thought IRB should play. And that was that, look, we want to have people in this trial who are prone to developing Alzheimer's. And that's understood. But there are, those very people are the ones who are most vulnerable to brain injuries from this experimental drug. And
was the ApoE4 genetic?
ApoE4, correct. And I can understand why they want them in the trial. And to identify them, the drug company gave them genetic testing. Okay, so far so good.
Yep.
And they told them that look, people with this condition, this gene variant, are more susceptible to brain injuries, brain bleeding, brain swelling. And so that's fine so far. But what really jumped out at me was the conclusion, and I'm sure there are people who disagree with this, and they've told me they disagree with it, that we're not going to tell you whether you have that condition or not. And excuse me?
That seems to, that undermines the whole concept of informed consent, right? I mean, because you're in fact, you're going out of your way not to inform someone so that they can't make a truly educated
right. You couldn't
decision.
consent because you don't know what you're consenting to, because you don't know the true risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, their response, actually, we didn't get a response, which is part of what I'll get into, was that, well, we told you that if you have this condition, you're going to have you might have a problem, but it didn't go far enough. So a couple of things that also troubled me, that when I went to the IRB that approved this protocol, Advera, they absolutely refused to talk to me. They wouldn't even get on the phone with me. And I didn't understand that. I'm not an evil person. I'm not a mean person. I have a fairly documented record of accuracy. I do understand.
I don't know. I've heard you've been sued for billions of dollars. So I don't know.
Fortunately, I had it in the bank, so that was no problem. So anyhow, I didn't understand why they didn't want to get on the phone with me, but they didn't. The FDA wouldn't talk to me. And ASI wouldn't talk to me. ASI set up an interview, and we were happy to talk to you, and then at the last minute they canceled it. So I started. There was reason to look carefully at Advera, and I found out that they had the private equity connection, and so did WCG, which was its big competitor. And they were growing of huge importance in the field. And to me, look, as an outsider, but a reasonably smart guy, the word private equity and ethics panel don't belong in the same sentence. And I'm sure there are people who disagree with me on that, and they have, but it didn't seem right. And so after the Alzheimer's story, I decided, well, what's my next project? I thought, well, let me look at the private equity role in IRBs, and maybe there's more of the story to tell. And indeed, there was. And I found that to begin with, I was looking at the two major ones, WCG and Advera, And I was surprised to learn that it had become so profitable that they were able to buy all these companies to assist the drug company in running these trials. And that just seemed to run, I mean, did not compute, because everyone knows why these, well, they should know why institutional review boards came about, was to advocate for the patients, to protect the volunteers who are putting their lives on the line. We needed that. We've seen what happens when that didn't happen. And so it just didn't seem right. And so it turned out that both of them were earning as much money, basically having a greater income, advising drug companies on how to run their drug trials than they were income from actually overseeing the protocols, which is why they were created in the first place. That struck me as a real problem. But as I kept digging, I thought, well, okay, Advera approved this for ASI, and what's the story about with WCG, since they're also huge and probably bigger than Advera. So I started looking into them, and once again, the lack of transparency drew me like bees to honey. And when the FDA wouldn't tell me what drug companies were hiring WCG or Advera, I said, well, why? That can't be controversial. I mean, they said it was proprietary. Well, it's not proprietary. And so again, I kept pushing and pushing, but at this point, I didn't have the data really to turn it into a significant story and to hook my editors, which incidentally is very difficult to do these days when you don't insert the word Trump into every story.
Yeah.
Right.
So I was swimming against the stream here, but again, because they hadn't heard of IRBs. I mean,
Right.
Whatever. I thought they should know about IRBs, so I kept pushing. So anyhow, there was no transparency there, and Advera and WCG did eventually, send me some statements, but at any rate, I'm getting ahead of myself. What I found is that I wanted to connect them again to the drug companies and see what kind of evaluation they were giving. And what I discovered is that in the case that I highlighted, that Novo Nordisk, which is not an insignificant player in the world of pharmaceuticals these days. Well, they have been in the headlines lately.
Yeah,
and I discovered that they had, in fact, Advera had bought a big part of WCG, and
Novo.
I thought, Novo, I'm sorry, pardon me. Yeah, Novo had.
Advara wishes they bought a big part of WCG.
Yeah, pardon me. Well, they probably tried, but it didn't.
That's the next iteration of all this. Is they just all combine into one.
WC Vara.
Yeah.
And I thought, you're looking at Ozempic or semaglutide would really kind of be of relevancy to our viewers and readers, because everybody was using it. It had such a huge impact on our healthcare. And I discovered that Novo Nordisk, very interesting company again, and I'm interested in learning more. If anybody out there wants to tell me anything about them, I'm eager to hear it.
Well, there's some board members, ex-board members walking around somewhere.
Yeah, well, half of them they bounced. Yeah. I found that they had advised, a certain number of or had overseen certain number of drug trials for Novo Nordisk, but they were doing other things. But after Novo bought a significant chunk of WCG, their use of it just exploded, and that to me was significant, that they wanted to go there, and so that's sort of. And then I kept poking around, and I realized, well, if one's doing it, the other one probably is too. So I looked at Advera, and I came across a name that should be on the tips of the tongue of everybody in this country, Blackstone, which eventually will own everything in the company, in this country, and they bought a part of Advera, and they had been acquiring drug companies. And I thought, well, what are these drug companies? Are they seeking approval with their new drugs from that company from Advera? And so it took a while. And I won't get into how I got all these documents because the FDA did not want to share it with me, but I got them. And I learned that, yes, in fact, some of the companies that Blackstone owned were in fact using Advera for approval. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I think, people ought to be paying more attention to this, because that last story, there were no people that were dying directly as a result of these decisions. That doesn't mean that didn't happen. It just means that I didn't know about it. Now people do die in drug trials. I understand that. That's a risk they take, and the companies take in trying to develop life-saving medicine. I understand that. But was there a causal relationship between these deaths and the drug? So if anyone knows anything about that, you know where to reach me.
It's interesting. You mentioned that FDA didn't want to give you documents, people don't want to talk about it, and so this lack of transparency is fairly concerning, considering these are going to be drugs that eventually the general public will be taking, physicians will be prescribing. And so I'm curious, is that sort of a theme that you saw throughout this, where there was just very limited transparency across the board for what people were willing to share?
Yes, that's generally true in medical issues, and there's the law that says you can't talk about particular patient care, but I know, and I've confronted that, and that's often used to protect a lot of wrongdoing, which is very upsetting to me. But yes, so generally there's secrecy, but it's not almost across the board, and it was pretty much across the board when it comes to private equity and their involvement in these institutional review boards, which merits more than just a letter from two U.S. senators. The senators didn't follow up on that, to my best knowledge. So somebody needed to, and hey, okay, I figured here I am. What do I have to do with my time? So I did, and the response has been generally very good. There are those who really have a very direct connection to some of these drugs, who have a financial interest in telling me that I'm full of it. And it's not the first time that someone said that to me. So, there you have it. That's what I do as a journalist. Sometimes it's helpful to society, and sometimes society gets mad at me. But I try and, as the Times says, provide the best version of the truth.
Yeah, I've been, something I've wondered about publicly for years is and you talked about it, the IRBs acquiring these companies who do patient recruitment. They do now own all kinds of data collection software. They use, clinical trial management software systems that are full of patient data, probably millions and millions of data points of patient data. Which, again, to me has always seemed extremely counter to the idea, or at least potentially conflicting with the idea of doing things that should be only in the best interest of safety for patients. Is there no oversight, in these transactions? I guess, is this something the FDA should be who should be responsible for sort of helping police these things, or is there a mechanism?
Well, there isn't really a mechanism, and that's what the General Accounting Office had discovered in response to the letters from the U.S. senators, is that it was squishy. It was like you're in a dark room and you're feeling around, and there were so many conflicting rules and from different agencies that there was no line of authority, and there was no definition of what a good IRB review would look like, or what a bad one would look like. So it left it really up to the profession to self-regulate. And money can accomplish a whole lot of things, profits, and apparently money allowed, WCG to sponsor some of these, panels at the annual conventions. And I thought, well, you shouldn't be able to buy your way into presenting scientific, studies. Well, at any rate,
you got a whole nother topic there.
yes, you do. So maybe I kicked the hornet's nest here, but yeah. So that was something that interests me. Who oversees it? FDA, but the FDA is coming apart at the seams, as you probably noticed. I mean, can we count on them now? Oh, I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot of things that RFK Jr. should have done. And there are things that he shouldn't have done, and he did, obviously. So if we're sitting around waiting for the FDA to get things in order, well, we may not live long enough to see that.
And so when I've brought up these things, I've always been sort of like the rejoinder is like, oh, well, there's a firewall between IRB, IRB work and all the other commercial work that goes on. And I know you talk to a lot of people, presumably, who've, previous employees or maybe current, I don't know. Like, is that the sense that you got? I mean, there seemed to be some things in the article that seem to suggest that's certainly not the case. But I guess, did you get any sort of feel on, like, is there a true separation of these things?
Well, I've run across that argument about firewalls for a long time. And I did a project of many articles and later a book about McKinsey. And they would be advising, they would be on all sides of the deal. And they would say, well, we got these firewalls. Well, those firewalls turned out to be pretty darn porous. I mean, they were advising drug companies. Purdue, drug companies at the same time, they were advising the FDA on how to regulate those drug companies. Well, we have a firewall. And of course, we later found that some of the same people who were advising the FDA were advising Purdue Pharma, which I don't need to remind your astute listeners that they've had some problems. And, and anyhow, the body count's pretty high. Let's just put it that way.
Well, it's interesting because even if the firewalls aren't porous, the thing that I've always struggled with is like, okay, we're like, it's a wall. Walls have an end at some point, and there's still someone at the top who's overseeing both sides of the firewall. So even if that wall is super strong and effective, at some point it ends. And at some point there's a nexus point where both of those roll up into. Is that not still a problem?
I would think it is, but no one's really asked me. And I don't have the authority, but it just seems to be a common sense conclusion. The word common sense or the words have been misused over time. Everything, common sense could be used to defend all kinds of horrible actions. But sure. I think you're right there. Anyhow, something needs to be done. Transparency would be a beginning point. But pressure needs to be put on the regulators to do their job, and which would be the FDA, and it would help. I mean, again, there's other agencies that are involved in this too. There needs to be a little clearer pathway there's a lot of rules and regulations for that you have to meet, but at the end of the day, it doesn't answer the question of whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. All it does is say, are you checking all the right boxes? And it's a lot easier to check all the right boxes than it is to actually do a good job. And I don't know what kind of job they're doing. Maybe you obviously have a much better vantage point than I do, but, I kind of don't have a clue, but I'm a little suspicious.
Yeah. And I'll say, side, we're submitting things to IRBs all the time. And frankly, it's pretty much always either WCG or Advara nowadays. There are a few independent, smaller IRBs cropping up. I don't know if that's good or bad.
For now, until they get bought.
Yes. Honestly, it's not a bad business model to start an IRB and wait for WCG to buy you. But We don't really get a lot of insight into what the hell's going on, in the review process. I will say, when I worked at an academic institution, you get a ton of insight into that review process. And I know, because this is sort of the issue for me, academic IRBs, frankly, they suck to work with. They're incredibly, they agree. Make things so challenging.
Yeah.
But then the other side is that you've got, clearly for-profit IRBs. Is there what's the answer? Because I feel like they're both going to inherently have, glaring flaws.
Right. And conflict of interest, right?
And conflicts of interest of their own. Yeah, I suppose that's true. So where does that leave us?
Well, your observation obviously correct on the academic IRBs. I mean, the people had to be dragged kicking and screaming to serve on them, and they weren't getting paid for it. This was extracurricular activity, and that just, for something as important as this, didn't make a whole lot of sense. And of course, it dragged things out, and drug companies wanted quicker answers. Patients wanted quicker answers. And so, that's where the private equity people swooped in, because they had the money to hire permanent people and they served a purpose. It's just that, just the whole concept of private equity, it just doesn't work. I mean, it's to maximize profits. It's to buy and sell, and there's no continuity in a situation like that. And so I don't know what the answer is. Smarter people than me are going to have to come up with that.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think, I guess to speak to the bigger question, what role does private equity have in, so let's just say clinical research, or even larger than that, healthcare. Right? And look, again, I'm not smart enough to try to bite that off all at once, but it seems the further we go, the worse it becomes.
Well, our healthcare system is such a mess already that it's easy to be sort of exploited for profits. And look, I think the record is fairly clear as to what has happened when private equity moves into the healthcare arena. I mean, my colleagues at the Times have written about that, and it hasn't resulted in better care for patients or better treatment. It's resulted in what you would expect it to result. Private equity acts as private equity should. It's out there to make profits, and there's nothing wrong with making profits. I mean, I'm all for that. I make a profit here, well, small one at the New York Times, but yeah, it's almost to the point where I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle. I mean, they're everywhere now, and expanding as we speak, today. Who knows where they'll be? I mean, they're buying the media, they're buying everything, and it's creepy and frightening, and one of many things that keep me up at night.
Well, I think that's where, when we sort of noodle on this and start thinking about how would we solve this, it just sort of keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you get to the point where you're like, well, healthcare is broken, and well, I don't know how to fix it. It just keeps sort of bubbling up to that point. It becomes overwhelming and depressing.
Yes, depressing is a good word for it.
Yeah, no, it is. It does. It's bigger, the sort of broader the perspective gets. Because again, we live in a pretty, at least I'll say, I speak for myself, live in a pretty small world within clinical trials. And you're like, man, this stuff sucks. Let's back up and look bigger. You're like, oh, no, that's a terrible idea, because now I have all the existential dread in the world because everything is sort of screwed.
Well, you get real existential with it, and it all doesn't matter.
Yeah, well,
go true existentialism.
It does for now. It does while I'm alive.
Well, in this environment where silence seemed to be the way to go, it was helpful and refreshing to come across your podcast, because, I mean, you were speaking frankly and honestly, and making your points that needed to be made. And I mean, it's a discussion. We ought to be having discussions like this.
Yeah.
You're not keeping it in the back room. So, to that extent, you've contributed, and hopefully I've contributed by throwing a few facts out there for people to munch on and get mad at me about. But that we're doing our jobs when we do that.
That's
Yeah,
what
no,
I think.
I think, yeah, and said I was actually, again, I was extremely excited for this to come out. I'm surprised, frankly, it hasn't gotten a little more discussion like in the clinical research ecosystem, because I think these are like topics that maybe with not so much depth. I mean, I've heard people discuss throughout the year. So I'm a little surprised. Like, I mean, what sort of, like, have you gotten much feedback yourself in terms of, and also to go back, sorry, I'm going to just chain some questions together here. You talked presumably again to a lot of people in the industry. I guess, how did you find that? Because I do feel like there are more transparent conversations that happen amongst people. People want to come out and talk about some of these things, but you just don't see a lot publicly.
No, you don't. And I apologize to some of the people who have been followers of you, because all their comments got cut out of the story. My story was squeezed down, and look, that happens. But I think you raise a good point. I mean, you want some kind of discussion, some kind of reaction. You got to, shake people up, and it was seriously underplayed, I thought, in by the Times. And I love this organization, and I mean, they did what they thought was right in the scheme of all the news that's out there, and I accept that. But I think that's just the reality. Is one of the reasons that it hasn't stirred up more. It's probably because we didn't really promote it that well, and because there were other stories that were also important, and I acknowledge that. I mean, when we're talking about the end of democracy, come on, so IRBs and democracy, what's going to win out there?
Yeah,
so anyhow, yes, but I have gotten a number of calls from people, and that's been gratifying. Mm-hmm. People who have quietly reached out to me, who read the article, and who I wish I had the time, and maybe at some point I will, to follow up on those tips. But I really need people like that to reach out and say, Walt, what can you do here, if anything? So that's an open invitation to any rabble rousers who are listening to this podcast.
Probably a few out there. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think that there's probably two things that what I would sort of see here is that, like, I think our industry, and we've talked about this a bit on the podcast, that folks are not willing to stir the pot a whole lot in this space. Like, we were just talking about this before we jumped on about like different roles who don't feel comfortable coming out and like saying with their name how things really are. There's just a lot of like fear and lack of transparency, to your point. So it's like people just don't talk about it, or aren't even if they will talk about it with drinks in their hand or off to the side, they're not willing to say it and be like, hey, private equity in this space, that's probably wrong, because for whatever reason their company that they work for or they're trying to raise, or they're just like, their people are scared for their own little bubble. And so they don't come out. Even if they personally believe it, they're less willing to put their name out there and have an opinion.
Yeah, I imagine as a journalist that's something you've come across a lot.
Oh yes. And there's one case in this story that was hugely disappointing to me, because there was an individual, I'm not going to mention his name, who everyone said you got to go to him because he worked inside the industry, and he's really upset, and he's spoken out publicly about it. And I called him up, and it was a great interview, except he said, don't use my name. I said, well, I can't use what you just told me for reasons that, fairness. I mean, there are exceptions, but he said, look, my professional life has already been ruined because I've spoken out about this. And I said, well, maybe if we talk about it and I can put it in context, maybe we can restore some of that, that life of that you had in the past. But he was too fearful, and he said, they're going to come after me. And I know what that's like. So at any rate, I regret that there were a lot of people that, but the point is also that to balance the scale, there were a lot of people who did talk to me. Yeah. And not a lot of them that you saw that I quote in the paper, because again, those quotes were pulled out for space reasons. But
sure.
So to all those people, I apologize, but I tried to keep your quotes in. But I think we got the message across as best as we could.
Was there anything else like particularly interesting that sort of left on the cutting room floor? Anything you wish had been included that wasn't?
The whole patient recruitment side of things interests me.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are problems out there, and finding the right mix and all that stuff, and that's just an area that is worthy of exploration. Obviously, you guys know way more about that and deal with it all the time. But I thought that's an issue I would have liked to have done more on. I know a little bit about it, but there wasn't a way to shoehorn that into this story. So maybe down the road.
Yeah, if you need any more material, you just let us know.
I will.
We'll get you set up. Was there this is just my own random curiosity. Like we saw, I can't say how long ago it was because I don't know, but WCG at one point was set to go to IPO.
Yeah, they were.
And they didn't. Was there any, did you get any insight into why that was? I don't know if it was ever publicly known.
Well, they were buying up all these companies in anticipation of going public.
Right.
And there was some internal dispute. I never got to the bottom of it, but I really didn't dig too deep because it wasn't totally relevant to what I was doing. Yeah, but sure. I, like others, we're curious about, why that happened.
Well, honestly, wouldn't that have been even more? I mean, a public company is even more sort of their goal is to make money for their shareholders, like above all else, right? Like, from my understanding. So,
but there is some accountability in public companies.
Fair.
I had to, there's information that they have to share with those shareholders and the public, and so I would have made. Maybe that was the reason they didn't go. But who knows? That the leader left. He left WCG to be an advisor to, surprise, Novo Nordisk. Imagine that.
Yeah. Wow.
The cross pollination is something to behold there with those companies, particularly Novo and WCG. But so that's what I think about that.
Well, we've seen that in other spaces in the clinical trial industry, even on the site side, right? Where it's like you have these companies that are VC, PE backed, and then you look at like who's on whose board, and like this network's old CEO is on this other one's board, and it's the same thing. It's still, again, VC, PE funding on the backside, but same incestuous board pollination.
Yeah. Well. That's true, and I wish I'd had more time to kind of dig around in that area.
Where do you feel like this fits? I mean, you've written about faulty medical labs and toxic ingredients and drug supply chain. So where does the sort of failure of IRBs and sort of things like concealment of genetic risk, like where does that sort of fit in the bigger picture of, I don't know what you would call it, like negligence in the field? Yeah. Like how do you feel that sort of, where does that fit for you?
Well, it fits snugly, I should say, into my interests. I can't tell you exactly what I'm doing right now because investigative reporters are supposed to be secretive and keep the cards close to their vest, and I will. But there is one very big drug company that interests me, that's been in the news lately. Hint, hint. People out there who know about this are free to call me, but you can probably conclude who that is. But it's when there's so much money at stake, it merits close scrutiny, and I don't think anybody's really giving it at this point.
Fair. All right, Denali, got anything else?
No, I just appreciate that you wrote this article. I remember back in the day when I sort of first was acquired by Advara doing this, that was one of the first questions I had. I was like, how exactly does this work with private equity and their reviews? So, and it's just been, a constant sort of under theme that I think, we've talked about it a couple of times, so you hear about it. So I appreciate the bringing it to the forefront because, to your point, it's something that's pretty concerning and pretty quiet.
Well, to that point, I think, look, the general public probably has no fucking idea what any of this means. Like
No, they don't.
that there are IRBs and that
Right.
what they do and how the whole, I mean, I've done this for 15 years. I still like don't even tell people what my job is. I'm just like drug testing. Don't worry about it. Like there's just so many
software. It's easier.
Yeah. There's a lot of layers to it. And you know, even beyond that, people in our own industry don't, I think, understand or have a grasp for how some of this fits together in the more nebulous ways that there's probably layers beyond all of this, even like we can safely assume. So I think it's amazing. This stuff needs to be talked about. We talked about this before, me and Nolly, but I think like, again, we work in an industry that's sort of so happy to pat itself on its back with all the altruism, and which is great. It's not wrong, but because of that, we oftentimes don't want to criticize all the bad stuff that's happening.
Well, that's true in journalism too. I mean, we're patting ourselves on the back a lot, and there's a disinclination to highlight our shortcomings. Although this news organization is trying its best to remedy that. Sure. How successful they are remains to be seen, but they're trying.
Sure. Well, very good, man. Again, thank you for coming on. For a multiple prize winner gracing or lowering themselves to come be on our podcast. We do seriously appreciate that. Anything you want to close with, and then where can people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach me at Walt Bog, WALTBOG at nytimes.com. Always open to hear from people with stories to tell and wrongs that need righting. So that's where I am. And thanks for the podcast. I've enjoyed it, and thanks for having me.
Very good. All right, we'll be back later this week.
Yep, yes, Del Smith from Acclinate we're gonna chat with Del. So that'll be fun.
Very cool. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Walt, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.